morning, Safari Mack fans, and welcome to Safari Mack Explores North America. I'm your guide and your host, helping you make connections to the wild. Well, I hope we've all enjoyed our 3-week crossing through the Caribbean Sea, and I bet we're eager to step ashore. But before we do that, this weekend, I wanted to take a moment and honor another specially requested animal from one of my subscribers. Today, we look at the world of the manatee. But before we begin, as always, if you're new to my channel, welcome. Hit that like and subscribe button so you can stay tuned in to special announcements as well as what the next animal may be or where we go next in the world. Check out my Facebook page for either conservation project updates from all over the world, as well as zoo and aquarium updates, and even special conservation messages that you can practice at home. And if you have a question about my series or maybe about something that I might not have covered in my previous episodes, feel free to send me an email, which you'll always find down in the description below. But if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's just take one more swim. First of all, before we begin, instead of just talking about origins and family, we have to go in a way the opposite. We have to talk about the family first to better understand the origins. So, are we all okay with that? Good. So first of all, can anybody take a wild guess as to what the manatee's closest living cousin is? If you guess the elephant, you're right. Believe it or not, the elephant is the manatee's closest living relative. But how is this? Here's one form of evidence. As you can see on this manatee's pectoral flippers, they have toenails that are very similar to that of an elephant's. But the biggest tie-in to them being related is genetics. Scientists have confirmed that these animals evolved from an ancient group of animals called Tetratheria, which includes all forms of sirenidae, as well as proboscideans, or animals with a trunk. But that group evolved from another ancient group called Ambithropodas. So these mammals, as you can see, some lived like a bit of somewhat of an aquatic lifestyle. Others chose to stay on the land. Either way, we have evidence that manatees and elephants had originally evolved from a common group of ancestors. But of course, as time progressed, they would follow very different evolutionary paths. So today we have 4 kinds of manatees: the West Indian manatee, the Amazonian manatee, the West African manatee, and the dugong, which you would find in Southeast Asian waters as well as that of Northern Australia. As you can see here, a big difference between them and dugongs and manatees is how the dugong has a tail that's similar to that of a whale or a dolphin, and not like a big paddleboard like that of the manatees. Let's talk about their habitat. First of all, you won't just find manatees out in the open ocean, despite being adaptable to high salinity in the water, but you can also find them in rivers, as well as estuaries, where freshwater and saltwater would meet, and it's considered to be a perfect habitat for sport fish, like snapper, grouper, you name it. But manatees prefer to hang out in seagrass beddings where they can find enough food. Now, I want to explain something pretty interesting about manatees. These are big animals, and there's a rule that says that big animals tend to have like a layer of fat that keeps them warm. Like our extinct friend here, the mammoth, they had a layer of fat too, just to stay warm. The biggest difference between them and elephants in terms of their layers of fat, the mammoth was said to have an incredible 3 inches. But that doesn't apply to the manatee, so sorry, buddy. Unfortunately, because these creatures live in tropical settings, when the weather cools, and I mean like when it gets cold, they don't do so well with cold snaps. In fact, they can die from cold shock. So during this time, many manatees, despite having a solitary lifestyle, they will often kind of congregate together to these power plants where the waters are relatively warm and they can hang out and escape the cold. This has often led them to being a popular tourist attraction to seeing wild manatees. But here's another great advantage of being big. For them, being their huge size, they really aren't attacked that much from different predators. So for this shark, he's got to find food somewhere else. But now I want to make something clear. Now these power plants are popular areas, and there's some springs where they will also congregate, and it's pretty fun to like paddle alongside these creatures. But by all means, do not attempt to touch these animals because these mammals are protected by law and by the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972. So, unfortunately, it's a big no-no. In fact, you can face jail time if you attempt to touch these creatures. And here's another thing that people sometimes worry about, Sometimes you might see I bet you may have seen a group of manatees. It looks like that they're being stranded, right? Actually, they're not. This is kind of a display that they do, or this is what they're doing during their breeding season. It's one female that's being pursued by a group of males, which are sometimes called a mating herd, as they try to compete with one another to win the female's affections, and eventually one of them will become the father of her future calf. When she gives birth after a gestation period of 13 months, she gives birth to a 60 to 70 pound baby. So imagine that delivery. But after that, mom spends the next 3 to 4 years teaching her baby all that it needs to know how to survive in the wild. But even wilder, during all that time, the baby continuously nurses from its mother, so it drinks its mom's warm milk up until it's ready to leave and strike out on its own out in the wild. So, talk about a bit of a commitment. Speaking of food, let's talk about what they eat. Now, I bet those who have seen manatees in zoos or aquariums or even rehabilitation centers where they're recovering, I bet you've seen manatees mostly eating lettuce, right? Now, of course, these are herbivores, but in the wild, their diet is a little more differently. Manatees are known to eat 60 different varieties of underwater vegetation, with seagrass being a majority of their diet. But believe it or not, marine biologists, scientists that study marine life, have seen manatees also eating this. If the tide is high enough, they have been known to eat from mangrove trees. They'll eat the leaves, and they'll even nibble on the roots. So these creatures are known to eat 100 pounds to 200 pounds of food a day just to sustain their bulk. So that's a big appetite, similar to that of their cousin the elephant. But here's another wild thing that I bet you didn't know about with elephants or manatees. Just like elephants, manatees actually go through a number of molars throughout their entire lives, as one set of molars is constantly worn down by the constant activity of feeding. But now, they are herbivores, but they're not always eating vegetation all the time. Scientists have known that they will also unintentionally, or maybe not even being fully aware of it, they have been known to eat crustaceans and even fish. This has been seen both in the wild and in human care. So, let's talk about their place in human culture. Now, I'm sure we're all familiar with this mythical creature, the mermaid. Now, I bet we know the story. Christopher Columbus was the very first to spot manatees, and he mistook it for a mermaid. But there's a lot more to manatees than just mermaids. The Seminoles, not that Seminole, no. The Seminole, the Native American Seminoles of Florida. These people relied on manatees for thousands of years for food, as well as for using every bit of the manatee. So their bones were often made into special trinkets or artifacts. They relied on manatees big time, as I guess it would be like something similar to that of in the Western United States, the Sioux Nation relying on the American bison as their economy. But there's more than just mermaids and Seminoles. In West Africa, the manatees are viewed as sacred because in the seer creation myth, they're viewed as guardians of the future. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that's all I have time for today with this part, so be sure to join me next Saturday for part 2 of the manatee. But until then, this is Safari Mack. I'll see you all out there.